Hello everyone, welcome back. I know it's been a while. I got busy and tired, but I'm back now. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Caroline, this is Short Skirts and Sarcasm, and I'm gonna be wrapping up March and April because when March and April finished, I did not wrap up, but I'm gonna do them both together. And I didn't read as much as maybe I normally do, so I am hoping this isn't gonna take too long. I read 16 books in March and 9 books in April, and these are in alphabetical order by author last name. So I'm gonna start off in March and then we're gonna do April. So first I read Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston. It's a middle grade book about this girl Amari who is trying to search for her missing older brother, and then she, in an attempt to find him, joins this summer camp, and her mom's really proud of her. She's like, great, your brother was also in the summer camp, it's gonna be super great. And she gets there and they're like, hello, it's a superhero camp. And she's like, what? And they're like, yeah, you're magical, you're welcome. And so she is in this competition and training camp for the summer, and she's also trying to figure out what happened to her missing brother, and now she knows there might be some sort of supernatural connection there. So it's great. It's a middle grade book, and I wish that it was out when I was younger because I would have loved this. I love it now, and I'm so glad I read it. It was great. I rated it 5 stars. It made me so happy. And next, another 5-star read. I read The Diviners by Libba Bray. This is a reread for me. I read these books when they came out, and I am now going back and rereading them, and I have no regrets. This book is great. It's about Evie O'Neill. She can touch things and read their pasts, and this gets her in trouble in her hometown in Ohio. So her parents decide to ship her off to her uncle's house, and so he can try to keep an eye on her. However, her uncle's house is in Manhattan. So she at first is like, oh no, you mean I have to go to New York? That's so sad. And then she like gets on the train and is like, yay, these are my dreams that come true. And it's also the 1920s, so she gets up to a lot of fun, and she meets new people, and some of them may also have some sort of magical connection. But then a serial killer comes to town and seems to also have a supernatural connection. So she tries to help out the investigation, and things get creepy and weird, and I love this book so much. It's so well written, the characters have so much depth, and it's a YA book as well, so it feels very fun and accessible while also dealing with darker stuff like childhood trauma and serial killers, obviously, and also like political stuff that was going on in the US in the 1920s. So Libba Bray is one of my favorite authors, and rereading her books like really validates me in thinking that she's my favorite author, or one of my favorite authors. Then I read Murder is Easy by Agatha Christie. It's I rated it 4 stars. It's not like one of my faves, but it was still pretty good. I forget who the detective is. Maybe it's a Miss Marple, I can't remember. But there is a string of kind of suspicious deaths in a small town, and everything is not as it seems, and there's a lot of like secrets and stuff that come to light. It's very classic Agatha Christie, and it was a fun time. Then I read The Woman Who Fooled the World by Bo Donnelly and Nick Toscano, and this is a biography of Belle Gibson, who was a famous Australian Instagram influencer whose downfall came when it was revealed that she had made up her cancer to like become famous and shill a miraculous diet that was just like vegan, gluten-free stuff, which just say it's a good recipe, like, you know, just it made me so mad. And I read this because I listened to the Maintenance Phase podcast episode about her, and I was like, I need to know more. So I did read this book, and it was really good. I feel like I learned a lot, even though it made me sad. Speaking of learned a lot, but also made me sad, I finally read They Were Her Property by Stephanie E. Jones Rogers. I've wanted to read this book since it came out. The author was interviewed on the Stuff You Missed in History podcast. I love that podcast. And she came on to talk about her book. And I was like, I need to know more. And I got the ebook, and it's been sitting on my iPad for years now, I guess. I think it came out in 2019, but I'm not sure. So I finally got to it, and it was so good. It's a nonfiction book detailing the conventions around slave owning, especially as it came to white women in particular. That's why it's called They Were Her Property. And it's a bummer, but I think a necessary to read bummer. It was really, really interesting. It was very well written, so well researched. And the author, Stephanie E. Jones Rogers, went into as much detail as she could, tried to give a full picture of everyone that was involved in this book. Now, obviously, sometimes records get lost or just didn't get kept in the first place. So I do really appreciate her writing this book, and I am so glad I finally read it. Then I read Galatea by Madeline Miller. This was a like 50-ish page novella or short story maybe about the mythical woman Galatea, who was sculpted out of, I think, marble, and then the sculptor brought her to life. And it's about, and that's kind of, is that where the story is? I'm not sure. I'm not super familiar with the original myth, but in this, Galatea has come to life, and her sculptor, who has imagined and built her to be this ideal woman, is immediately confronted with her now humanity and imperfections, and he's annoyed. And this sort of like details her trying to live in this reality that her sculptor has created. And it was really good. I love Madeline Miller, and I really want to reread some of her other books soon. So I'm hoping I'll get to that. And then I read The Gifts That Bind Us by Caroline O'Donoghue. This was one of my most anticipated releases. I think it came out in March. Did it come out in March? No, it came out in February. And I was so pumped. And I was correct to be pumped because it is pump worthy. It lived up to my expectations. It is the sequel to All Our Hidden Gifts, which came out in 2021, which I read when it came out, and I loved it. And then I was like, I need the second book. And now that I finished the second book, I need the third book, and it's not out yet. So let's get cracking, publishing industry. I need it. I need it in my life right now. But the story follows Maeve. She is in secondary school in Ireland, and she finds a tarot card deck and really feels a connection with it. She starts doing readings for people at her school, and then she accidentally makes her ex-best friend Lily disappear without a trace. And so she has to find her, and they have a complicated relationship, but she makes new friends through this. And then at the end, she does come back. And so this book is about trying to reintegrate her ex-best friend into her life, and they have a lot of stuff to work through. And so a lot of the story is about that, but a lot of the story is also about cults and what makes people vulnerable to cults, and cults that say they're about something are really not about that something. They're really about control. And you get to like delve deeper into a lot of things that showed up in the first book, and now it's time to like really go deep into those things. And I loved it. I really need the third book like right now. And then I read Vagina Problems by Lara Parker. This is a memoir about endometriosis. It's a huge bummer, but also I loved it. It made me feel so seen. I'm like, yes, this is also me sometimes. So it's a really close-up look at disability and chronic illness. It is about this one woman, Lara Parker's experience. And so as it is about her, not everything is universally applicable, but a lot of the stuff she talks about, like people not understanding that she's in pain all the time, people going, oh, when will you be better? When like chronic illnesses, like it's in the name, chronic, it's not gonna change, it's not gonna get better. And doctors not believing her. And like, this is something that is not true just of almost every single person with endometriosis, but is the experience of so many people with chronic illnesses and chronic pain and disability, etc. So I really love this, and I'm really glad that Lara decided to share her story. Obviously, like, it's called Vagina Problems. It is a very intimate look at her problems. So I think she's very brave for vocalizing this or writing it, you know what I mean. Yeah, I'm really glad this book exists because it made me feel like I'm not alone. So great. Then I read The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. And I got this book on Audible because I had a free credit, and I had seen this book around. I wasn't too sure if I really wanted to read it, and I was like, it's a thriller. Like, how many thrillers have I read? This seems like a pretty, not formulaic, but like, it seems like a standard thriller. I'm not sure if I really like want to read it. But then I was looking at it on Audible, and I saw that the narrator is Gemma Whelan, and I think Gemma Whelan has an amazing voice. Gemma Whelan is maybe the most famous for being Yara Greyjoy on Game of Thrones, but she's so much more than that. She's a great actor. She's in a lot of different things, and she is really good. And she also just has a really great voice, and I really like it. And her voice is very expressive. So I got it because of Gemma Whelan. But the book itself was also so good. So win-win there. So the main character, whose name I've forgotten, she's a police officer on leave because of a nebulous traumatic thing that happened, and she needs some time off. So is it her friend's wedding that she goes to? I think so. Maybe it's bachelorette party. Anyway, she goes to maybe it's her brother's wedding. Some sort of event, and it's in this disused sanatorium. And then her friend goes missing, and it's kind of weird. And then she finds out that like the building has sort of a storied, troubling past, and that while the sanatorium was being renovated, some other kind of weird things happened, written off as accidents, but like, there's a weird feeling there. And so it does turn into like quite a high stakes thriller, and it definitely kept me guessing. I really loved it, and I think there's a sequel coming out, so I'm gonna read that too. And then I read Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, and I really loved it. It's about a trans woman who has her ex become pregnant? No. Her ex's current partner is pregnant, and they ask the main character to like become a co-parenting group with the current partner. There's a lot of discussions of like, what is gender and to what extent is gender useful in describing people's identities, etc. And it was very, very interesting, and I loved it. I thought the story was really great. I thought it was going in one direction, and then it wasn't, and I was like, ooh. So I was like sucked in by this book and loved it. So I really would recommend. I wanted to read this when it came out, and then I didn't get around to it, but then I finally did, and I'm glad I did. It was great. Then I read Soulstar by C.L. Polk. This is the last in the series, the Kingston Cycle. The first book is Witchmark. Yes. And this was also great. Like, I loved the first one, I loved the second one, and I also loved the third one. All three of these books are narrated from different perspectives, so it's all the same sort of overarching story, but your main character is different in each one. And I thought it was so clever. It's so well written. There's so much great world building, and it's sort of set around this analog of World War I that happens in the first book, or right before the first book starts. And then after that, there's so much like political upheaval and social movements and political betrayal and family drama, and it's so great. I absolutely loved it, and I would recommend. And the books are not that long, so if you want something short but still like meaty and feel like the accomplishment that when you finish a series, then this is for you because it's very quick to get through. Then I read The Dark Queens by Shelley Puhack, and wow, this was an e-arc. I got it on NetGalley, and I think they approved me after the book was actually released, but it's definitely out now. And basically it's about two medieval queens that sort of had a rivalry, and this is like early medieval, so they're really not well known. It's pre-Charlemagne, and they both lived in what is now France and maybe parts of Western Germany, but I can't remember it was in March and it's been a while, so I've forgotten not everything, but a lot. But it was so great. It was such an intimate portrait of these people. Because they were royals, they were lucky enough to have records kept of them. So we do get to know a lot of things about them that maybe other people in this time period didn't get to have records be made about them so that we can read them. Yeah, there's still like gaps in the record because this was the Dark Ages, so named because of the lack of records from that time, not because life was darker then. But it was so interesting. There was so much like political stuff going on, and the author does a really great job of like presenting all these very complicated political things to, I don't want to say a late audience, but like she makes it very accessible. And I do love a clear, accessible nonfiction writer. There's no point in writing a bunch of gobbledygook that like 3 people are going to be able to read, because the point of research is to enhance everyone's knowledge so that everyone else can build on it. So The Dark Queen's super great. Then I read Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This is V.E. Schwab's latest book. I had it pre-ordered. It was one of my like top anticipated releases for this year, and it lived up to it in my opinion. I didn't absolutely love it. There are definitely other V.E. Schwab books that I loved more, but this was pretty solid. I thought it was going to be an adult fiction book, but really it was more like a YA book. And so at first I found it a little jarring. It seemed a little Coraline, but not the same. It's like, it's not just like a ripoff of Coraline. It's that vibe, but different. So it's this girl, she's raised in an orphanage and she thinks that all of her family is dead. However, then she gets found by her, I think, uncle, who is like, oh, you belong in our family house. And she's like, oh, great, I have a home. And then she gets there and things are weird. And then she like disappears on to the side of like this other side of the garden, and then things are even weirder. And then she's like, oh no, there's evil here. And then she and her family have to like sort of team up to try to contain the evil. And I've described it badly, but it was pretty good. I really did enjoy it. Then I read No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder, and this is a nonfiction book about domestic abuse. So it's real heavy. It was a real bummer, but it was also really good, and I would recommend it if reading about domestic abuse isn't going to be like detrimental to you. If you're okay with reading about abuse, I would really, really recommend it. It's such an interesting, valuable knowledge fountain. And then I read Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. This is another book that I have been wanting to read for quite a while, and I finally did, and it's about the history of racism and fat phobia and how they are combined, and how both of those things are bad, and together they're really, really bad. And it's also like, again, so interesting and so valuable. So I would also really recommend it. I rated it 5 stars. And yeah, like I said, I've been wanting to read it for a really long time. It's been on my radar because I've wanted to read more nonfiction books about both racism and fat phobia. And this is the 2 of them together. And I think really goes into why our current like societal beliefs about weight and weight stigma are so damaging, and that like they come from damaging things, and they are continuing now to damage people in the present day. And then last, another nonfiction book that I rated 4 stars is Worn: A People's History of Clothing by Sophie Tannhauser. And like the title says, it is about clothes and the histories of material and how like material and clothing making evolved. So it goes through different types of fibers. Like it has a chapter on silk, it has a chapter on cotton, and it talks about like not only how fashion trends changed and how clothes are made, but it also talks about like the people behind the garment making industry, like the people that harvest the cotton, the people that harvest silk, the people that like raise sheep to make wool, etc. So it's a great full picture, and again, accessible and clear. And so I would really, really recommend it. It's also not that long. It's not that long, but it is so rich with information. So would recommend. So that's everything I read in March. And now we're gonna move on to April, starting with Lovely War by Julie Berry. And this is a romance set in the First World War, but told from the perspective of the Greek pantheon during the Second World War. So it's an interesting setup, which was what drew me to it in the first place. And we know I love a World War I story, so that box is ticked. And I also love a Greek myth retelling, so that box is ticked. And I'm a general fan of romance, so I guess that box is ticked too. And I really, really enjoyed it. The love story itself was pretty standard. However, I thought the framing of it was very clever, and I really did enjoy it. And there was this sort of omniscient, not exactly magical realism, but like almost magical realism that I also really enjoy. So this was a solid read. I really liked it. Then I read Unwell Women by Eleanor Cleghorn. This is continuing my unintended theme of reading about women's medical history. So this is about women's medical history and about chronic illnesses, and especially, not exclusively, but it did talk a lot about endometriosis and how endometriosis is underdiagnosed and also stays undiagnosed in a lot of people for an average, I think, of like 7 to 15 years, which is so long. And basically how like women's pain is ignored, including in medical settings, including when the medical professionals are women. And it's, again, really interesting, really valuable, but such a bummer. And it does also talk about medical racism and how like in women of color, all these like factors that are present of like women's pain not being believed and being underdiagnosed and undiagnosed for a long time are exacerbated. So again, it was a good overview of like the entire history of like women's pain not being believed from ancient Greece up until now, including the author does like put some of her own experience in. It's at the end. It's not like she's talking about herself through the whole book. It's not a memoir. It is a nonfiction book, but she does disclose that she also has health problems herself. And then I read The Promise by Damon Galgut, and I thought this was extremely okay. This was like I had such good reading up until now. I've rated them all 4 or 5 stars, and this is the first 3-star read. This is about a South African family living in South Africa, sort of starting in the apartheid era, and then we follow the family. It's an intergenerational story as like apartheid is ended in 1994 and further on and on from there. You know what I mean? It was okay. I didn't feel a connection with any of the characters. It's hailed as being like an honest look at families under apartheid, and I don't think it is. It feels like guilty crap without any redeeming qualities or real introspection. But I don't know, maybe you liked it, it's just my opinion. Then I read The Awakenings by Sarah Main. This was a NetGalley e-arc, and it's a historical fiction within a historical fiction. Like the main character is living, I think in the 1890s, maybe the 1860s, a while ago. And she keeps having these visions of the ancient kings of Northumbria and like the royal family of Northumbria and their political rivals and entourage. And so of course her family is like, well, obviously she's insane and needs to marry her first cousin, because that's what they see as the solution. And she's like, I don't think it is. And so she befriends like this doctor who's like, seems like you have some things going on and you should receive medical treatment. And she's like, you're the first person that has any common sense. And he's like, let's get you help. And then everyone else is like, obviously he's trying to kidnap her because she's insane. And that part of the story is very frustrating, but considering like all the medical history that I just talked about, not exactly new. It wasn't new then, and it's, I guess, not new now. Probably framed in a different way now, but whatever. So it is an interesting story. I do really like it. I've forgotten most of the details now, so I guess it wasn't memorable in that way, but I did really enjoy reading it. So I gave it 4 stars, and I would recommend. Then I read The Romanovs by Simon Sebag Montefiore, and it was so long. It was almost 800 pages. It's a nonfiction book about the Romanov family, 1613 to 1918, and it was so interesting. It's an exhaustive look at the family and like all the people in it, and like they're a bunch of weirdos, and we get to see their weirdness up close, and it's so weird but so good. So I spent a lot of this book going, but why though? go to therapy. But I guess therapy and the way we think of it now was not available in the 1700s. So an interesting fact that really stayed with me with this was that Catherine the Great used to make her own coffee in the morning. So this is an open letter to all the CEOs I've ever known. If Catherine the Great can make her own coffee, you don't need to bark at the receptionist to make your coffee. Make it yourself. And then I read An Offer from a Gentleman and Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, both by Julia Quinn. These are the third and fourth books in the Bridgerton series, and they were cute. I liked them. The Offer from a Gentleman is about Benedict, the second Bridgerton sibling, and then Offer from a Gentleman is about Colin, the third Bridgerton sibling. And their romances, obviously, we can see what happens, but I was surprised at the introspection that the characters had, especially like the male characters. Like one of them was like thinking like, why do I feel this way? Oh, it's because I'm jealous, and like had that moment of introspection and then decided to do better and then did do better. And so I really appreciated that, and they're also just really funny and a lot of fun. So I mean, if you want something like cute and fluffy and romancy, then I would recommend this series. Then I read A Year of the Monkey by Patti Smith, and it is a memoir of a year in the life of Patti Smith, who I think is most famous for being a singer, but she has written books, and I think this is just one of them. I think she's written more. I didn't hugely connect with it. Like, I appreciated it. I liked the writing. I just didn't connect with the narrative enough, but it was decent. And it was also only 171 pages, so I did read it in a day, and it was solid. And then I read Meet Me at the Wedding by Georgia Toffolo. So yes, this is another Georgia Toffolo romance book. This is the fourth in the series of 4. As I talked about in my February wrap up, I read the third one first and I've read the fourth one second. So in the coming months, I'm going to read the first and second one. So again, I thought it was okay. Like, the romance was cute. It was fine. There's a lot of like misunderstanding. The dialogue it doesn't always feel realistic to me. And a lot of, at least in these two books, like the conflict that is keeping the two romantic partners apart, seems a little contrived and a little silly. And it's like, if you actually had one single conversation, you would work it out. But I guess then there wouldn't be a book. But I feel like it could have been done better. And I think the writing style could be clearer. So that's it. These are all the books that I read in March and April. And I will see you very soon for my May wrap up, because the May wrap up is also late, but it's not as late as this video. So whatever, I guess. And thank you for watching. You can find me online. I've linked all my social media in the description, and please like and subscribe if you are so inclined, and I will see you next time. Bye guys.